Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran New York jazz bassist David Finck. We spoke in early November about his new 2021 CD, BASSic Instinct, that is a follow-up to his 2019 Burton Avenue music release, Bassically Jazz. Born in Rochester, New York, he grew up in a musical family and began playing bass at the age of 10. He would go on to perform with the likes of Tony Bennett, Elton John, Herbie Hancock, Natalie Cole, Dizzy Gillespie, Stewart, Rosemary Clooney, and so many others. He's got a wonderful, amazing story. Enjoy.
Great to catch up with you. Thanks for taking a minute after the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Your latest album, BASSic Instinct, not to be confused with the other BASSic Instinct, is coming out during a very, very strange time on planet Earth. Makes the weather look pale. And I'm wondering, what does it mean for it to come out now? The chance for live music, we're kind of on the other end of this pandemic. What does it mean to have a release out now?
Well, first of all, let me make a disclaimer. Sharon Stone has nothing to do with this CD, for starters. And it's BASSic, B-A-S-S, so obviously making reference to my instrument of choice. Right now, for me, this recording, well, most of it was made during the heat of the pandemic, and so there was a lot of emailing files around to different parts of the world to assemble this thing. And honestly, it is not the way I like to make music at all. I much prefer being in a room with however many musicians are involved and really feeling things in the moment. Having said that, casting is crucial, and I hired people who were very good at massaging their way into a track. So I had the drummer, and the wonderful drummer that I've used in Santa Barbara. He put the drum part on, and then I could send it to a piano player in Pasadena, and then a guitar player in Rio de Janeiro, and a trumpet player in England. I mean, it was put together for the most part that way, with a couple of tracks that I did live here in the New York area where we could be isolated enough to play at the same time. So the record really represents a process for me. And I think I pulled it off pretty successfully. Nothing sounds like everybody was in a different part of the country or world when it was recorded. Because if it did, I would have deleted something and recut it. But it kind of feels good to have it come out now. I'm happy with it, and it's been well received. I'm going to celebrate, I think it's February 22nd. I'll do a show at Birdland here in New York and play some of this material. But yeah, this was a pandemic project, and I know a lot of other people who have done them. And we didn't have a choice. That's
where we were at the time. You know, everyone during this time has had a lot of self-reflections, lots of moments because of the lockdown to, be with ourselves and to figure things out. What did you figure out about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as you hit the stage and reemerge?
Well, for starters, I don't exercise enough because I suddenly realized, without being able to go out and do stuff, I was sitting around a lot. And when I was even working on this record, you're sitting on it, in a chair in front of the computer or at the keyboard. So that's one thing that I realized about myself. The other stuff, a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with music. A lot of it was just looking at our society, and well, at least in our country and some others, and watching how divided we are about stuff that we should clearly not be. Yeah, it was upsetting. I found it to be an upsetting time, and without getting all political, we didn't have good leadership at the beginning of this pandemic, and it just split everything up. Thank goodness this thing seems to be subsiding as long as everybody, wears a mask and, stays away from each other. And I guess the more people who get the vaccine, it seems to help also. The feelings are really mixed. Yeah, it's been interesting. And, my mother tells me, hey, we've gone through this and worse. over the years. We'll get through this one too. Meanwhile, she curses at the television whenever she sees a politician.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, she's older, and she went through, you know, all of the, you know, the Korean, Vietnam, all of the wars, the hearings on un-American activities, all kinds of, you know, the murders of Martin Luther King and JFK and Bobby Kennedy. You know, she's seen all this stuff. And she said, we'll get through it. And I kind of, you know, relied on her wisdom. It just feels like it's happening so slowly.
Yeah, it does for sure. And I thought about that too, you know, from my generation to my age, you know, I don't know that we ever faced anything as tumultuous as this. So I think the growth is going to be huge. And I have teenage kids too, so I see, you know, their resilience amped up quite a bit since this began. So speaking of youth, you know, you grew up in New York. Talk to me a little bit about how you got the jazz bug. How did this become your life?
Well, I actually grew up, went through high school in just north of Philadelphia. I went to, it's very funny, I went to a high school, Cheltenham High School, which was also attended by Andy Snitzer, tenor saxophone player, Jeff Lorber of Jeff Lorber Fusion, Michael and Randy Brecker, and hold on, this is where it really makes a left turn, Reggie Jackson, Baseball Hall of Famer, and, ready, hold on to your seats, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Wow.
So, now, we all went at different times, but it was kind of wild. And it was,
wow.
you know, it was when I was a youngster. My parents were great music lovers, and my father actually encouraged me to play the bass. He played pretty good jazz guitar, although not as a professional. And I think he wanted a bass player around to play with. So he said, why don't you play that? And that's kind of where it began. And then since he had a lot of records, I mean, the record collection had everything from Bernstein and the Philharmonic to Count Basie with Joe Williams. And then, of course, being a child of the 60s and 70s, I had my Beatles records, my Earth, Wind, and Fire records, Tower of Power. But, you know, I also loved Frank Sinatra and Peggy Lee, Aretha Franklin. So I really had a lot of mix in everything. And you know what? Truthfully, there's a little jazz in all of that. Elements of jazz, harmonically and rhythmically. And so it all happened kind of at once.
So what was the first live show that you saw that really made you think, man, that's something I want to do later on?
My dad and mom took me to see Count Basie. I think I was like 12 or 13. And it knocked me out. I mean, the band was unbelievable. And I remember walking, it was one of those kind of tented venues outdoors. And I was walking with my father, and he said, see that guy over there eating ice cream? I said, yeah. I said, that's Freddie Green. So I didn't know who Freddie Green was at the time, but my father, being a guitarist, we went over, and he was so sweet, and he talked to us, and I said, wow, these jazz guys, they like ice cream too, like, you know, they're just, you know, as a little kid, to see somebody who you find out is a jazz icon being a regular guy was very special. And, you know, after I got into it in high school. I played in some bands around Philadelphia, and then after high school, I actually taught at a summer music camp for a while, and then I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. I spent 4 years and got a degree in applied double bass. At the time, they didn't have a jazz program at Eastman, so I was a classical bass major, but I did participate in the jazz program and played a lot of jobs in and around Rochester. And after that, I joined the Woody Herman Band. Woody had picked a lot of musicians from the Eastman School. The first guy that I knew who went was John Otto, who we sadly lost a couple of years ago. But John was a pianist and arranger. He went first, and then I went next, and then the drummer, Dave Radicek, went just a few weeks after me. So the three of us had worked together in school, and then we went on to Woody's band. Later on, Rosemary Clooney picked John Otto up out of Woody's band, and stolen from Woody, I guess. And he went on to be her musical director for until she passed away. After I did Woody's band for about a year, and then moved to New York City because I wanted a chance to play with some of my jazz heroes and others. So I did that in 1980. I started doing all kinds of things, and I realized that all of that music that I had heard as a youngster definitely informed my musical instincts and musical interests. So I did all kinds of things. Plenty of jazz, some pop, some theater, and I always enjoyed working with singers. So, and I continue to do all of those kinds of things.
And you have been around an impressive array of all kinds of musicians, from Tony Bennett, Elton John, Herbie Hancock, Dionne Warwick, Rosemary Clooney. I mean, we can go on and on, but what I'm curious about is, when you get around these legends and luminaries, what did you learn from them that you in turn have taken and taught to the younger players that you get around?
It's a long list of things. I learned something on every job. Sometimes it's what not to do. But, I mean, in the time that I spent, for example, with Rosemary Clooney, I learned a lot about interpreting a song and the ingredients of a good song, and the art of keeping that balance between words and music, which is a real challenge. Oftentimes people sacrifice one for the other, and they're only telling half of the story. And Rosemary had an incredible ability to deliver a complete version of a song. But, I learned that also from listening to Frank Sinatra records and Peggy Lee records and Joe Williams records and others. Some of it, those things I talk about with younger players when I have the opportunity. As a bass player, I also, because I was traveling with some of these different artists, we would play jazz festivals, and I'd get to meet and hear, people like Ray Brown or Eddie Gomez or Ron Carter, and, it was always, free bass lessons from those guys.
Every day you wake up, you have the chance to create music, whether you're practicing on your own or you get to perform with others. What is the greatest part about being a professional musician for you?
The greatest part is, I guess, it has to do with being able to work at something you really love doing. That's a rarity. I know a lot of people, and some of my neighbors, who get up and go to work every day and kind of live for the weekend because that's their 2 days off where they don't have to go to work. And for me, I enjoy, every time that phone rings and somebody says, "Hey, can you go to Kansas City?" Or, "Can you go to San Francisco for 2 days?" Or, "I've got 1 week in Milan," or, whatever it is. That's always fun for me. And along with that, I would say the actual playing itself is a very human process. And I try to maintain that sense of humanity, making this record BASSic Instinct, even though we weren't all in the same room. That's something I always strive for. So in all live situations, if you're with good players and everybody's got their ears open and they're really listening, there's a lot of communication that goes on, and that is really special. I also thoroughly enjoyed having the opportunity to travel internationally and, experience the cultures of Japan and Brazil and Argentina and Sweden and Italy and France and all of those things. This is a civilization, and I got to experience it. It's amazing to go to Rome and walk into any cathedral and go, "Oh, wow, Michelangelo did that." That's hanging there or standing in the corner. It's something fantastic.
It's amazing. I've actually been to Rome, and I remember I was telling somebody recently that I was by the Vatican one night. I was exhausted. I'd been traveling I was in my early 20s, and there was an opera, and I sat down, and I don't usually cry during performances, but man, this thing knocked me out. It was a Vivaldi presentation, and the singer, and just the way it all orchestrated, and being on a crystal clear night in Rome, I was overcome. It was amazing.
I've been there. I know what you're saying. In fact, I was somewhere, I can't remember, where they had an opera festival. It was in a smaller city. It wasn't Rome. And it was the same thing. People who had apartments surrounding the piazza opened their windows and stood out on their balconies. Yeah. And they knew every aria like it was a Beatles concert or something.
Yeah.
It was really fantastic. Beautiful stuff.
It's one of those beautiful wonders of the world that, a lot of people, really should experience, is that this world is so wide. There's so much that's going on, and it's beautiful. I got to tell you real quick before we move on, when you were talking about, like jazz musicians like certain things, I will never forget one guy, I can't remember who told me this, but he was on tour with Jackie McLean, and he really wanted to get ice cream at midnight in, Italy somewhere, and I'll never forget that. Just the idea that Jackie, this guy with such jazz prowess, all he wanted was an ice cream cone when he was in Europe.
Listen, I've got a friend who told me that Ringo Starr, every night, all he wants is a baked potato in his dressing room. Got to have a baked potato.
Yeah, see, again, that's the Rockwellian painting. I will never forget that. I always remember that.
Exactly.
So, you've been on a lot of live stages around the world, and you've done a lot of live performance. Now that we're getting back to this, and we were away from it for a while, which is unprecedented globally, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music as we get back to it?
Oh, I hope that people realize how important it is, and what fun it is, and what great entertainment it is, and how emotional it can be. It's really tricky now because we basically have been enjoying music at home on the radio or playing, no more CDs, playing, files now since everything is digital. But there is something really special about hearing live music, no matter what kind of music it is. Certainly, for me, hearing jazz music or pop music. I was lucky enough last couple of times they played New York. I played at Madison Square Garden with the Eagles. They had a string section, and I was in the string section. And the last time was just, toward the end of this pandemic. Not that it's over yet, but it was as things were starting to unroll a little bit. And to be on stage with these guys in a room full of, I guess, 15,000 people was pretty exciting. I was also glad that, I was at a great distance from the audience. But, it's a great feeling. And, of course, that band is incredible. They sound like they did 40 years ago.
Wow.
Very talented guy, Vince Gill, in the band. He's great. And Don Henley still sings great. And it was pretty spectacular. I know there's a level of excitement to it. I did several tours with George Michael in Europe, and I had never played stadiums before. It was amazing to go play a soccer field with a guy and have 20,000 screaming fans, knew every word he sang, and the band was great, and we had an orchestra with us. But it was really exciting. It was just, the minute he walked on stage, the place went nuts. I had the same experience going to hear Frank Sinatra at Carnegie Hall, and I had the same experience playing in some jazz clubs where the audience is right there with you, and you feel the energy, the interest, and oftentimes the interaction, and that's something that I hope will come back.
You know, the thing about what you just explained is something that a lot of people on this planet will never experience in their lives. And I was watching the World Series with my wife, and these guys were just making mistakes, and there's just things that happen in the World Series and even in the playoffs that don't happen in regular season. And I always have to remember, can you imagine how much adrenaline they have, how loud the crowd is, and how much pressure those guys have? It's unreal.
Oh, I cannot imagine. I mean, it's not like missing a couple of chords on a standard tune. I mean, you go down there and you swing and miss, and you got 50,000 people booing you. It's like, or you throw a bad pitch, or you miss a ball. I can't imagine. On the other hand, I look at it and I go, these guys are making an awful lot of money. There's some expectation there. I mean, I know I could never do it, and I always found baseball to be amazing. It's amazing that a guy can throw a pitch at 100 miles per hour, and somebody could actually hit it.
Yeah.
They're skilled.
Yeah, they are. I was a huge Mets fan. My dad actually was born in Brooklyn and raised in Long Island, so I had a pretty good time in the 80s. The Royals won it while I was here, and then the Mets in 86. And I always remember, and I always just look at that ball that goes through Billy Buckner's legs and what he went through his whole life. And the thing that I think about, this is the thing I didn't realize until a year ago, and I can't believe I didn't realize this. Billy Buckner, they took him out in the late innings because he had bad knees. They only put him in that game because he had been with them for so long and he wanted to be on the field to win the World Series. So ultimately,
Wow.
there was supposed to be, I can't remember who it was, but there was another regular first baseman, and he was only supposed to ceremoniously be in there to do that. So can you imagine that hanging over you? But the pressure that he went through. So
Yeah.
Anyway, don't want to deviate too far, but I kind of want to get a little mystical here with you a little bit. And, you've been around for a long, long time. You've accumulated wisdom. And this question isn't about regret, but if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self, and you can give your younger self the version of you right before you became a professional, you could give yourself a piece of advice based on what you've learned after all this time on Earth. What would you say to yourself?
Oh, I mean, about music or about anything?
Anything that would be helpful.
Well, one thing is certainly choose your battles carefully, and I think that works in all kinds of relationships, from marriages to musical relationships, to relationships with your neighbors and friends. Always maintain a sense of humor. I think that is crucial to more joy in life. And I think that, honesty, of course, is an important thing. And as a musician, I wish that I had explored songwriting earlier and maybe, studied more orchestration. I really admire those people that can, sit down and say, okay, yeah, you need string parts. Okay, I'll do the woodwinds. Yeah, I know all the transpositions, and, I know what this is going to sound like. And I know when I was in college, there was a professor named Ray Wright at the Eastman School of Music who was a wonderful orchestrator. He probably had the best ears of any human being I ever knew. And I remember that students would come to him with their arrangements, the scores, and he'd leaf through it and he'd say, "You're not going to like bars 27 through 35, and hand it back. Because he'd looked at it and he knew the orchestration was messed up or transposition was wrong. He wouldn't tell him what it was. He'd just say, look at those bars, look at those measures, because they're not okay. And I thought, wow, that must be great. Or somebody who can orchestrate on an airplane. I spent a long time working with Andre Previn, and Andre was one of those guys. He could write out an arrangement, in the backseat of a taxi, no problem. No keyboard, he didn't need it. Pretty spectacular. So I guess I wish I had studied a little more of that. But, it's hard because, playing the bass and studying the bass is a whole thing in itself.
Absolutely.
I guess it's not too late. I guess I could take an adult orchestration class.
Yeah. So, everyone has a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
I can't totally separate myself from being a musician because it's a very, consuming facet. But I think that I'm essentially a well-liked, somewhat well-respected person. I know that I do maintain a sense of humor, and so sometimes I'm thought of as a funny guy, and I certainly have tried as best I can to do whatever it is I'm doing, be that, with my children or, in music or, even mowing the lawn for that matter. And I'm interested in learning things, very concerned with fairness, and certainly concerned with things in our country. I think that the worst thing about our country right now is racism. I find it disgusting, and as my mother once said to me many years ago, it makes no sense to dismiss an entire race of people based on their skin color or background. She said it's much easier to hate people on an individual basis, and it's really true. Jerks come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and so do great people. That stuff is disturbing to me, especially when I read the Constitution and I go, well, we're not really following these rules, are we? And I know the Constitution is a fluid document that's subject to interpretations, but there's danger in there too. And on the other hand, there are a lot of great things about our country. Jazz being one of them. Does that help? Does that answer? I don't know.
That's a great answer. That's wonderful. And David, this has been great, man. Thank you for opening up. Good luck with the album, the shows at Birdland and beyond.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was great speaking with you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to David for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Davino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.